11-year-old Sally Horner was a smart, cheerful, and quiet girl. She was in a local five-and-dime store in 1948 and decided to steal a book on a dare. When she did this, however, she was stopped by a man who claimed to be an FBI agent and who said he was going to arrest her. What unfolded after this between her and this stranger was an extremely disturbing tale that extended for the next few years of her life. This is the story of a young life cut short, a young life full of potential that was taken away too soon. This is the disturbing case of Florence Sally Horner. Welcome back to M7 Crime Storytime, where we cover solved, unsolved, and twisted cases from across the globe. Today we're looking at the case of Florence Sally Horner, a case from the 1940s which will leave you shocked and disturbed. So, without further ado, let's get started. The young, beautiful little girl you see here is Florence Sally Horner. She was born in Trenton, New Jersey on April 16, 1937, to her father Russell Horner and mother Ella Goff Horner. Sally also had a half-sister named Susan Swain, who was 11 years older than her. When Sally was still quite young, her father died, leaving her mother to take care of the family and be the sole breadwinner for the two girls. Ella Horner, Sally Horner, and Susan Swain continued to live together at 944 Linden Street in New Jersey. Sally attended an elementary school called Northeast Elementary School that was in the area. The year was 1948, and Sally was soon going to turn 11 years old. By this time, she had grown into a beautiful, bright, and cheerful little girl. At school, she was known to be very punctual and a good student. At the time, most girls her age wanted to join the girls' club that their school had, and this was something that Sally, too, yearned for. However, the girls who had formed the club told her that if she wanted to join, she needed to steal something from the local five-and-dime store as an initiation task. The thought of doing something like this made Sally hesitant, and she wondered if it was worth the risk. But later, she decided to go ahead with it since she had always dreamed of becoming one of the girls. Sally's birthday was fast approaching, and she'd finally turn 11 years old. However, little did she know that her life was soon going to take a turn for the worse, a turn that was so disturbing and dark that nobody could have seen it coming. During the early summertime in 1948, shortly after Sally's 11th birthday, Ella Horner decided to go on a cross-country trip. Ella took her daughter Sally along to accompany her on this journey. On their travels, they decided to stop at Atlantic City. During their time there, Sally managed to find her way into a local five-and-dime store on her own, without her mother's company. When she entered the store, she remembered the dare that the girls at the club had given her and realized that this was likely her best opportunity to steal something. Sally then decided to go ahead and steal a notebook. As she picked up a 5-cent notebook and shoved it into her bag, a middle-aged man grabbed her by the arm and told her that he was an FBI agent. He told Sally that she was under arrest for stealing from the store. No real FBI agent would harass a young child in a store in this manner, so who was he really? The man's name was Frank LaSalle. He was not with the FBI or any other law enforcement agency. He wasn't even a security guard who worked at the store. So who was he? By the time Sally met Frank LaSalle, he was a 50-year-old convicted child abuser. Frank had been released on parole that very year, just 2 months before he met Sally at the store. He had earlier served time for the statutory physical abuse of 5 girls. These girls were between the ages of 12 and 14. Sally was also close to this age group when she met Frank, but of course, Sally didn't know this. When Sally heard the words, "You're under arrest," it terrified her. This was the first time she'd ever been in any sort of trouble, considering that she'd always been an obedient girl at school and a loving daughter to her mother. As a young child, she didn't know better and thought that she was really about to be arrested. The man then told her that he'd let her go as long as she reported back to him from time to time. If she didn't, he told her he'd place her into a reform school. Now, when Sally heard this, she felt that she had to agree to his rules. She felt like she couldn't tell her mother because she didn't want her to know about the crime she'd committed. Also, as a young child, It seemed to her that reporting from time to time was a much better option than telling her single mother she was going to prison. For the next 2 months after the incident in Atlantic City, Sally would report to Frank from time to time, who'd followed her and her mother back to New Jersey under the pretext of keeping an eye on her. As she was doing this, Frank was collecting information on her and slowly planning his next moves. Frank left for a while, but then stopped by to see Sally again in the middle of June of 1948, this time while she was walking home from Northeast School. At this time, Sally had just finished the 5th grade. When he met her, he had new instructions. These instructions demanded something that sounded terribly difficult to her. Frank wanted Sally to go back with him to Atlantic City, the same place where they'd met. This meant that she'd have to leave her family and go somewhere alone with this total stranger. Frank had a plan ready. He intended to pose as the father of Sally's classmate and invite her for a week-long vacation to Jersey Shore. Sally was hesitant to tell her mother about this at first, but she was more scared of the threat of going to jail, so she worked up her courage to do so. She went ahead and informed her mother that she'd been invited on a week-long vacation to Jersey Shore with a friend's family. Ella Horner, Sally's mother, thought that this was a wonderful opportunity for her daughter. She felt like her daughter was finally making some good friends, so when Sally asked her for permission, she agreed to let her go. On the day Sally was set to leave, she walked her a few blocks from their house at 944 Linden Street to the Camden bus depot. There she noticed Sally interacting with a man who she thought was the father of Sally's friend. She said goodbye to Sally and told her to have a good time and then return home safely. However, little did she know that the man Sally was with wasn't someone who she should have trusted. Frank had already planned what he was going to do by the time Sally's whereabouts became a concern. This plan also got Sally off the radar while making it look like there was absolutely nothing wrong. On arriving in Atlantic City, Sally and her abductor, Frank, both posed as father and daughter. They had their names changed and started living a completely different life. Sally was given a new name, Florence Planet, while Frank LaSalle also became Frank Planet. They didn't stay in Atlantic City for long, and soon after, the two moved to Baltimore. Frank made every effort to make it appear as if Sally and him were a family. He sent her to the St. Anne's Catholic School near where they lived. While doing this, Frank never forgot to make Sally write letters to her mother. He supervised what she wrote to make sure that she never revealed anything about where they were or what was going on to her mother. After the first week, Ella was waiting for her daughter to come back from vacation, but instead, a letter arrived from Sally. In the first letter, Sally said that she'd enjoyed her week-long vacation and wanted to stay a little longer. From then on, 1 week stretched into 2, then 3, then 4. Finally, on July 31st, 1948, Ella received the last letter from Sally. In it, Sally told her mom, "I don't want to write anymore." On receiving this message, Ella immediately called the police, knowing that something must have gone wrong with her. By August 5th, 1948, the search had begun. At this time, both Frank and Sally had moved to Baltimore. Frank had sensed that the police would arrive in Atlantic City soon enough and decided to get out of there. Meanwhile, the Camden detectives who were investigating Sally's kidnapping arrived at 203 Pacific Avenue in Atlantic City, the return address on the first few of Sally's letters. However, it was too late by then, because both Sally and her abductor were long gone. As the case was progressing, new charges were now brought up against Frank, which made it impossible for them to stay in Baltimore. This made Frank decide to move to Dallas. Young Sally never thought she'd find herself in such a situation. The man who had kidnapped her kept telling her that he was an FBI agent on a secret assignment. During the day, she'd be sent to school and pose as the loving daughter of a single father, and by night, she was abused and tortured. The routine went on for weeks, which soon turned to months. In Dallas, Frank found himself a job as a mechanic. Through this, he was able to get some money, and it helped keep up the appearance that he and Sally were just a regular father and daughter. They stayed at a quiet, well-kept trailer park called the Dallas West Mobile Home Park on West Commerce. Here, Frank continued to send Sally to school. he enrolled her at Our Lady of Good Counsel, a Catholic school that was on South Marsalis at 9th Street. During this time, he tried his best to pose as a father to Sally in the eyes of the public. Some of the neighbors found Frank to be very aloof and standoffish, while the girl, Sally, was very pleasant and a typical 11-year-old living with her widowed father. She had a generous allowance for clothes and sweets. She'd go shopping, swimming, and to her neighbors' trailers for dinner. Everyone thought her father was providing for her quite well. Back in New Jersey, it had been 5 months since Sally was kidnapped. Her mother, Ella Horner, had not yet given up hope in searching for her daughter. Meanwhile, in December of 1948, back in Dallas, where Sally was living with her abductor, the routine remained. She'd be physically tortured and abused day after day. However, during the day, she'd often be seen doing what a typical 11-year-old would do. It was at this time that Ruth Janish and her family moved into the trailer next door to the Planettes. As time went by, Janish began to grow suspicious of the relationship between her neighbor and his daughter. She noticed certain things that made her have doubts that they were actually father and daughter. The fact that Frank never let Sally out of his sight except when she was at school. The fact that she never had any friends her own age. That she never went anywhere and just stayed with her father in the trailer. All these things made her wonder if Sally was in trouble. Sally, on the other hand, was continuously tortured until her body felt sore. One day, her condition got so bad that she had to have an appendectomy. Her surgery was done at what's now called the Scottish Rite Hospital for Children. After the surgery, she walked like a stiff old lady. Instead of getting better, she was getting even worse. Slowly, the neighbors noticed that Sally was not herself whenever her father, Frank, was home. Janish planned on getting some information. When she got her alone, she tried to ask Sally what was really going on between her and Frank, but Sally wouldn't say anything. Finally, Janish decided not to meddle with them. She had also decided to move to San Jose, California in search of work. By February 1950, Ruth Janish and her family had packed up and moved to San Jose, California. A few months went by, and Janish finally settled down there. She was still worrying about Sally and wanted to be sure the girl was all right, so she sent a letter to Frank LaSalle in Dallas, encouraging him to come west where there'd be more opportunity. In February 1950, this is what Frank and Sally did. Sally's health was getting worse in the meantime. It got so bad that eventually she admitted the truth to a classmate about the true nature of the relationship with the man claiming to be her father. The friend told her that the behavior was wrong and that she ought to stop. But it was too late. Before her friend could help her, Frank had taken her to San Jose, California. On arriving in San Jose in February of 1950, Frank and Sally met Janish again, and they began to settle themselves in their new surroundings. However, by now, Sally felt like she had enough of this life. The next month, on March 21st, 1950, she gathered all her courage and managed to get Janish to a private place, and finally she opened up to her. She told her that she'd been kidnapped and wanted to go home. Sally had nothing else on her mind but wanting to be with her mother and her sister back in New Jersey. Janish immediately assisted Sally in calling her family in Camden after receiving this information. By this time, Ella believed that her daughter had been lost, so when she got the call on March 21st, 1950, Ella was overjoyed that her daughter was alive and wanted to come home. As soon as she got the news, the Camden County detectives and police force set off to bring Sally back home. The FBI recovered her from a trailer park in Southern California and arrested Frank. On March 31st, 1950, Sally boarded a plane with a Camden County prosecutor en route to Philadelphia International Airport, where she'd be reunited with her mother, Ella, and her older sister, Susan. By this time, her older sister Susan had given birth to a baby girl during the time Sally was in captivity. Frank was arrested on March 22, 1950, in San Jose, California. Even when he was caught, Frank continued to claim that he was Sally's father. However, authorities in New Jersey had already confirmed that Horner's real father had passed away years ago. After evidence was found, Frank was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 30 to 35 years in prison under the Mann Act. Sally had finally been reunited with her loved ones. During the summertime, she went out with her family to Florence Township. She even tried to live like a normal child, but things didn't fall back into place as she thought they would. It took longer for her to find herself once again. And no one could blame her, because she was just an 11-year-old girl when she was kidnapped and held captive for 21 months. There were signs that she was struggling to readjust to normal life. For instance, she hardly made any close contact with the people around her. She also suffered psychological trauma because of her experience, but her family and the community continued to give her support. Though this was helpful on their part, Sally continued to struggle with her emotions. When Frank's sentencing was announced, Sally finally felt a sense of peace. She felt like she'd finally received justice. However, she continued to be indifferent to her surroundings. The memories of her abduction and abuse still ran fresh in her mind. But despite the terror and the isolation she'd experienced, she did find small moments of joy and hope. There were times when she remembered making friends with people she met along the way. One of her most cherished memories was attending school again. These little moments of joy made Sally a truly remarkable and brave girl because she managed to find the light in the darkness. However, just as inspiring as her efforts were, Sally had another tragedy befall her soon after. It had been 2 years since Sally returned home to Camden to live with her family. On August 18, 1952, she was on a trip to the shore near Woodbine, New Jersey. While returning home from her trip, her car crashed into a parked truck. She died in an instant. She was just 15 years old. As the Associated Press reported on August 20, 1952, Florence Sally Horner, a 15-year-old Camden, New Jersey girl who spent 21 months as the captive of a middle-aged morals offender a few years ago, was killed in a highway accident when the car in which she was riding plowed into the rear of a parked truck. Not many people who knew Sally are alive today. Her niece, Diana Chiamingo, now 70, who was born in August 1948, 2 months into Sally's captivity, is one of the few still around. Chiamingo, who lives in Burlington, was 4 when Sally died and lived much of her life unaware that there was such a person as Sally whom she was related to. But even if the people who knew her personally are now few and far between, we hope that through this video, more will know the story of this brave girl and appreciate the courage and strength she displayed. What did you think about this brutal yet inspiring story of Florence Sally Horner? Tell us what you think in the comment section below. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more true crime content like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.